Omar Rahim was a decorated Dubai police officer with a spotless record. Layla Al-Maktoum was the elegant, mysterious wife of one of the most powerful sheikhs in the country. Their worlds were never meant to touch, until they did. What began as stolen glances behind palace walls spiraled into a dangerous affair that would expose hidden loyalties, betrayals, and a secret so explosive it ended in murder. When Layla vanished in the desert and Omar disappeared without a trace, the truth didn't die, it was buried, but not deep enough. Layla Al-Maktoum was a name whispered with admiration across Dubai's elite circles. She was the woman who had everything: beauty that turned heads, grace that commanded attention, and a husband whose name alone inspired fear and respect. Sheikh Hamdan Al-Maktoum. He was not just a man of power, he was power. He owned construction firms, hotels, oil shares, and even a private island. Layla, his wife of 6 years, was the jewel of his empire, always dressed in flowing designer gowns, her wrists lined with diamonds, her smile poised and picture-perfect. From the outside, their life looked like a modern fairy tale. Lavish parties thrown in their marble estate in Emirates Hills, international trips aboard private jets, charity galas with celebrities and exclusive dinners attended by royal. Her Instagram was a curated portrait of elegance and wealth. To her followers, she lived the dream. To Layla, it was something else entirely. She spent most of her days in silence. The mansion was quiet, always too quiet. Sheikh Hamdan was rarely home, always away on business, or so he said. When he was around, his presence chilled the air. He spoke in brief commands and looked through her rather than at her. Every decision, from what she wore to where she went, was filtered through layers of bodyguards, assistants, and his ever-watchful eye. Even within the sprawling mansion, there were rooms she was not allowed to enter. Behind closed doors, Layla was not a queen. She was a prisoner with golden chains. The staff knew better than to ask questions. The maids kept their eyes low. The guards never made small talk. The cameras, those blinking red dots, tucked into ceilings, never slept. Layla used to wonder if the cameras fed directly into a monitor in Hamdan's private study. The thought made her feel watched even in her sleep. Still, there were cracks in the walls of her perfect life. Late at night, she would sit on the balcony, staring into the Dubai skyline with a glass of wine she wasn't supposed to drink, letting the silence press into her chest. The city sparkled just beyond her reach, filled with people living messy, chaotic, free lives. She craved that chaos. She envied it. One afternoon, something strange happened, something small but enough to pull at the fabric of her routine. A new guard appeared. He wasn't introduced formally, but she noticed him right away. He stood taller than the others, didn't flinch when she looked at him, and his eyes lingered just a moment longer than they should have. She remembered thinking his face didn't match the others. It wasn't cold, it wasn't blank, it was human. His name was Omar Rahim. At first, she dismissed the thought. She wasn't stupid. She knew what would happen if anyone even suspected she noticed one of the guards. But something about him stayed with her. Days passed, and she began seeing him more often at the gates, near the pool, by the East Garden where she liked to walk in the early mornings. Was it coincidence, or was he watching her too? Then there was the matter of the sealed wing in the mansion's west corridor. She had tried the door once, long ago. It was locked. One of the guards had told her it was under renovation, but 6 years later, it was still sealed, and no work had ever been done. She had asked Hamdan once, and his eyes had turned sharp. Never go near there, he said. Since then she hadn't. But lately, with her boredom growing into restlessness, she found herself walking that way more often, her hand brushing the door handle. What was behind it? Why did it matter so much to keep it hidden? And why was Omar always stationed near? These thoughts began to knot together in her mind, forming something dangerous, something alive. The mansion, once a cage, began to feel like a puzzle. Every smile from a maid, every glance from a guard, every whisper of movement in the halls started to carry weight. Something was happening beneath the surface. She could feel it, and for the first time in years Layla felt awake. Omar Rahim was a man of routine and restraint. Every movement he made was calculated, precise and deliberate. To the other members of the Dubai police force, he was known for his clean record, steady nerves, and ability to keep secrets. But few knew the truth of how he came to Dubai in the first place. Fewer still dared to ask. Years ago, Omar had worked as a rising detective in Cairo's organized crime division. Back then, he was fearless, too fearless. His name had appeared in court records, tied to a scandal involving the disappearance of evidence in a high-profile corruption case. There were whispers of bribes, hidden bank accounts, and a dead informant whose body was never recovered. The charges never stuck, but Omar resigned quietly. Within weeks, he left Egypt under the pretext of a career change. No one questioned it, not out loud. He arrived in Dubai with little baggage, no family, and a reputation that was wiped clean. He reinvented himself, calm, obedient, invisible. His record in Dubai was spotless, and that was exactly how he wanted it. For 3 years he stayed below the radar, taking dull assignments, mall surveillance, minor fraud investigations, lost property cases, until one day he received a discreet offer, a private security detail, high profile, high risk, high reward, no questions allowed. The employer, Sheikh Hamdan Al-Maktoum. Omar didn't hesitate. The money alone was more than 5 years of government salary, but the real reason he accepted lay deeper. Omar had always been drawn to the hidden parts of power. He knew that behind every palace door was a secret someone would kill to protect. This was his chance to walk through one of those doors. From the moment he stepped inside the Sheikh's estate, Omar noticed the difference. Every hallway gleamed, every step echoed. The walls weren't just painted, they were polished. The staff moved like shadows. Nothing in the mansion felt accidental. The air itself smelled filtered, and at the center of it all was silence, a silence too loud to ignore. It didn't take him long to sense the tension. There was fear in the eyes of the maids, fear in the body language of the cook. Even the senior guards, military men who had seen combat, spoke with caution. They never said her name out loud, but it hung in the air like perfume. Layla. Omar first saw her during a morning patrol. She was walking through the garden, alone, her face turned toward the sun. She looked like a woman from a painting, perfectly still, perfectly distant. He kept his gaze forward. He didn't stare. He had learned that much from his past. Don't draw attention, especially not from someone like her. But something strange happened that day. As he passed her, he felt her eyes on him, not cold or guarded, but curious. It lasted only a second, but it was long enough to leave a mark. Over the following weeks, they crossed paths more often. At first he assumed it was coincidence, then it started to feel deliberate. She would appear near the staircase as he passed on his rounds. She would linger longer than necessary in the courtyard where he was assigned. She would pause in conversation when he walked by, her eyes briefly meeting his before moving on. Omar tried to ignore it. He reminded himself of the rules, of the sheikh, of the sealed room he'd seen near the west corridor, guarded, bolted and never spoken of. He reminded himself of the cameras, of the paychecks, of Cairo. But the feeling was growing, not just attraction, something else, a sense of unfinished business. He began to notice inconsistencies, rooms that were cleaned but never used, schedules that didn't match movement, and Layla herself, always looking over her shoulder, always pausing before she spoke, as if waiting for someone to listen. One night, during a perimeter check, he found a phone buried beneath a hedge outside the guest house, a burner phone. It was still warm from use. No fingerprints, one unread message on the screen, midnight, don't forget. Omar pocketed the phone without reporting it. He didn't know it yet, but that choice would change everything. The affair didn't begin with a touch, or a kiss, or even a conversation. It began with silence, a silence that lingered too long in the hallways, in the gardens, in the stolen glances between Layla and Omar. It was the kind of silence that wrapped itself around them, growing heavier by the day, until it could no longer be ignored. At first, Layla kept her distance. Her world was built on caution. She had spent years mastering the art of restraint, learning how to smile without warmth, how to walk without making noise, how to survive in a world where everything she did was recorded, judged, and remembered. But Omar was different. He didn't avert his gaze like the other. He didn't shrink into the shadows. He moved like someone who belonged in a world of danger, and that made him irresistible. It began with a note, folded neatly, and left on the marble ledge of the east garden. It contained only 3 words. I see. She found it during her morning walk, and carried it with her the rest of the day, hidden inside a book she wasn't reading. She didn't sleep that night. The next morning, she left a reply, a pressed white gardenia tucked inside a linen napkin, on the terrace table where she knew Omar would patrol at noon. No words, just the flower, a quiet answer. That was how they spoke in the beginning, without voice. A game of secrets passed in the open, invisible to the cameras and unnoticed by the staff trained to look away. Over time, the game became more daring, a slipped note beneath a teacup, a coded message etched in steam on a mirror. A glance held a moment too long, then came the first touch. It was nothing, a passing brush of hands, as Layla stepped past Omar in the corridor, but it was electric. Charged with everything they hadn't said. It changed the air between them. After that, the walls of the mansion began to close. They started meeting at night, in the south wing garden where the cameras didn't reach. Layla would wear a black shawl over her gown to disappear into the shadows, and Omar would arrive seconds later, always from a different angle, always alert. The meetings were brief, words were few, but the connection between them deepened with every stolen moment. Soon, Omar smuggled in a second burner phone, one that couldn't be traced and had no signal, unless activated manually. He gave it to Layla during one of their meetings, wrapped in cloth and buried in the soil of her favorite rosebush. She dug it out at dawn, her hands trembling. They used the phones sparingly. Short texts, no calls. Layla signed her messages with a single letter, Al. Omar never signed at all. For the first time in years, Layla felt alive. Not just seen, but understood. Omar didn't treat her like a possession. He asked nothing of her, yet offered something priceless, presence. And in return, she gave him something she hadn't given anyone since her marriage. But trust was a dangerous currency in the mansion. Unknown to them, another pair of eyes had begun to watch. Nadia, the long-serving maid, had noticed the pattern, the timing of Layla's walks, the direction of her glances, the way she paused near certain corners. She said nothing, but her silence wasn't born of loyalty. Nadia owed debts to people far more dangerous than the Sheikh, and secrets, when wrapped in silk and diamonds, could be sold for a high price. Still, Layla and Omar didn't know. They thought they were safe inside their secret world. They spoke of escaping, of buying new identities, of leaving Dubai forever. Omar said he had a contact, someone who could forge papers, arrange passage, hide them where no one would find them. They began to plan, not with hope, but with urgency. Something had shifted in the air. Layla felt it when she walked past her husband's study, and found the door ajar for the first time in months. She felt it in the sudden increase in security, in the way Tariq, her usually quiet driver, had started avoiding her eyes. She didn't know it yet, but time was running out, and the price of their affair was already being calculated behind closed doors. Nadia had always known her place in the mansion. She was the silent observer, the one who moved through rooms like air, cleaning fingerprints off glass, and folding silks that cost more than a year of her salary. She had come from nothing, and she had learned early that people like her were not supposed to be seen. In this house, she perfected the art of invisibility, but invisibility had its advantage. She had worked for Layla Al-Maktoum for 6 years, long enough to understand the rhythm of her moods, the subtle signs of sadness and fear that the outside world never saw. She had watched Layla become more restless over time, more distracted, more reckless. Then the changes started. Layla began leaving her room at odd hours, wandering the hallways without explanation. She would return with wind in her hair, and a dazed look in her eyes. Her phone, once kept locked away, was now always close. She laughed more, she cried more. Nadia noticed all of it. At first, she said nothing. It wasn't her business, but in a life of service, loyalty only stretched so far. Nadia had debts, serious debts. Her brother had been arrested in Sharjah, and the lawyer wanted payment that Nadia couldn't afford. Then came the threat. Quiet knocks at her apartment door. Notes slid under it. She needed money, and she needed it quickly. That's when she started watching more carefully. She began to follow Layla's movements in silence, memorizing her routine. When Layla went to the garden, Nadia followed a few steps behind. She started inspecting the laundry more thoroughly, and noticed unfamiliar cologne on one of Layla's scarves. one that didn't belong to the Sheikh. She began to examine trash before it was collected. That's where she found the first message, torn into pieces, stuffed at the bottom of a perfume box. She pieced it together on her bedroom floor. It was short, but it confirmed everything. From then on, Nadia started collecting evidence. She cleaned Layla's mirror but left fingerprint powder behind. She hid a small voice recorder under the dressing table. She borrowed the laundry room's hidden security feed, the one installed years ago for monitoring the help, and reviewed hours of footage. And when she noticed that the new security officer, Omar Rahim, was always nearby when Layla was out walking, she began to connect the dots. One afternoon, as she was tidying Layla's sitting room, she found a phone hidden inside a hollowed-out book, a burner, no contacts, only a handful of messages. One read, "Wait for the signal, then we move." That was the final piece. Nadia didn't hesitate. She knew that what she held was dangerous, but also valuable. She used a borrowed phone, untraceable, to send an anonymous tip to the Sheikh's office. She didn't name names. She didn't need to. All she wrote was, "Your wife is planning to run, with someone on your staff." 2 days later, the energy in the house changed. The guards rotated more frequently, the cameras were repositioned, and a new security protocol was introduced, quietly, without explanation. Layla seemed to feel it too. She began pacing her room more. Her eyes darted to the corners, to the cameras, to the shadows, but it was already too late. Nadia said nothing. She simply watched, blending into the background as she always had, but now her silence had a price. The envelope she received a week later confirmed that, thick, sealed, unmarked, delivered to her locker in the staff quarters. It was enough to clear her brother's legal trouble, enough to keep her mouth shut, enough to keep playing the role of the invisible maid. But deep down, Nadia knew this was no longer a secret waiting to explode. It was a trap, perfectly set, and soon someone was going to fall into it. The plan was supposed to be simple, clean, fast, and invisible. Just as the sun dipped below the horizon, and the city lights of Dubai began to flicker on like fireflies, Layla was to leave the mansion one last time. Her escape was scheduled for a Tuesday evening, a day when Sheikh Hamdan was in Abu Dhabi for a closed-door meeting with foreign investors, and the security rotation was light. Omar had mapped out everything. He had a contact who provided him with a temporary ID, an unregistered car, and access to a private airstrip on the edge of the desert. From there they would be flown to Oman, where a second identity and a new life awaited. He had spent weeks preparing, double-checking every detail, erasing trails, wiping messages, burying backups. He told no one. Not even Layla knew the full extent of what had been arranged. All she knew was the location of their meeting point, an abandoned farmhouse outside the city, long forgotten, half buried in sand. Layla made her final move at 6, dressed in a plain black abaya, no jewelry, no phone, no trace of wealth. She slipped out the rear service door with the help of Tariq, her trusted driver. She had once saved his sister's life with a quiet act of charity, and he had never forgotten it. Tonight he repaid the debt. He drove her in silence, taking the long road through side roads and desert trails, avoiding all traffic cameras. Neither of them spoke during the drive. Layla's hands trembled in her lap. Her eyes remained fixed on the horizon, as if afraid to look back. At 7:20, they arrived at the farmhouse. It was quiet, broken, abandoned. The roof had caved in on one side, and the desert had begun reclaiming it, swallowing the structure grain by grain. Layla stepped out of the car, heart pounding. The wind hissed softly through the cracks. She waited. Minutes passed, then 20, then 30. Omar never came. At first she thought it was a delay. Perhaps he had run into a checkpoint, or taken a longer route, but the silence stretched, long and heavy. Tariq began pacing, looking around nervous. Layla clutched the edge of her shawl tighter, feeling the cold creep into her bones despite the desert heat. By 8:11 p.m., something felt wrong. She told Tariq they had to leave, that they'd missed something, that maybe they should try again tomorrow, but Tariq hesitated. His eyes darted around the desert, wide and uncertain. He reached for his phone, but found no signal. That was when the headlights appeared on the horizon, a single vehicle, black, moving too slowly for a regular traveler. Layla's instinct screamed. She ordered Tariq to drive. Now he didn't move. His hands stayed frozen on the steering wheel, eyes locked on the approaching lights. Layla reached for the door handle to run, but it was too late. The scene went dark after that. The next morning, the police found Tariq's car abandoned on the shoulder of a desert road,
engine still warm, doors unlocked. There were no signs of a struggle, no blood, no Layla, no Tariq. News broke within hours. Layla Al-Maktoum, wife of one of Dubai's most powerful men, was missing. Whispers swirled, rumors of an affair, of betrayal. The Sheikh made no public statement. The mansion gates remained closed. Omar Rahim didn't report for duty the next morning. Calls went unanswered. His apartment was empty. Surveillance footage showed him leaving the security post 2 hours before Layla's disappearance, and then nothing. It was as if he had vanished into the sand. Behind the scenes, investigators scrambled. The story didn't make sense. There were no ransom demands, no political messages, just a vanished woman, a missing officer, and a trail of secrets buried somewhere in the desert. And far out in the dunes, the wind continued to whisper around the abandoned farmhouse, covering every footprint with sand.
2 weeks passed before the desert gave up its secret. A lone hiker, taking an off-grid route through the Al-Maktoum Conservation Reserve, stumbled upon a strange mound half covered by sand. At first, he thought it was an animal grave, the kind sometimes made by rangers, but something didn't feel right. The shape was too large. The ground was too fresh. When he kicked at it out of curiosity, the heel of a woman's foot emerged, stiff and pale beneath the sun. Within hours, the area was sealed off by police and forensics teams. Drones buzzed overhead. A perimeter was formed. The body was dug out slowly, with the care reserved for VIP discoveries. It was wrapped in a sheet, bound at the ankles, and partially decomposed. The face was swollen and bruised, the lips dark and dry. Jewelry was absent, ID missing, but there was no doubt who it was. Dental records confirmed it, Layla Al-Maktoum. News broke instantly. Despite efforts to suppress the story, it spread like wildfire through WhatsApp groups, Telegram channels, and anonymous blogs. Screenshots of a leaked internal report made their way online, showing the preliminary autopsy, death by asphyxiation. No signs of blunt force trauma. No stab wounds. No gunshots. Just hands, it seemed, had taken her life. Publicly, officials treated it as a tragic but vague incident, a disappearance turned crime, with no mention of foul play beyond what the media could guess. Privately, however, a task force was formed, discreet, off the books, because someone had to answer for this, and Sheikh Hamdan wanted answers quickly and quietly. The most obvious suspect was Omar Rahim. Every trace of him had vanished. His apartment in Dira was empty. No clothes, no phone, not even fingerprints. Neighbors said he was quiet, kept to himself, didn't socialize. The CCTV footage of the building showed him exiting the lobby the night Layla disappeared, wearing civilian clothes, carrying a small duffel bag, and then nothing. He didn't show up at any airport. His name didn't appear on any border logs. No hotel check-ins, no banking activity, no known aliases. It was as if he had evaporated. The search expanded. Drones scanned the desert for signs of a second grave. Divers combed the canals in case he'd tried to vanish by water. Facial recognition systems scanned thousands of CCTV feeds daily. Yet, nothing came up, not even a false match. It was too clean, too deliberate. Then came an unexpected twist. Investigators recovered Layla's tablet from the mansion, previously thought inactive. Inside, they found a hidden app disguised as a meditation tool. Within it, voice memos, notes, encrypted messages. Most were benign, fragments of poetry, unsent messages, shopping lists. But one stood out. It was a voice recording, dated 2 days before her disappearance. Layla's voice whispering, "If something happens to me, don't believe what they say. He told me he had to choose me or them. If this ends, it won't be an accident. And Nadia knows more than she says." The recording was sent for analysis. It was authentic. No edits, no deepfakes. Nadia, the maid, was quietly brought in for questioning. At first, she played dumb, confused and distressed. But as the pressure mounted, her facade cracked. She admitted to knowing about the affair but claimed she never told anyone. Then she changed her story. She said she feared for Layla's life, and tried to warn her. Finally, she admitted to sending an anonymous message to Sheikh Hamdan's office. Just once, she insisted, and only to protect the household's reputation. What she didn't admit to, but what investigators suspected, was that she had likely done more, much more, and not for free. Still, there was no physical evidence tying Nadia to the murder, no proof she had lured Layla to her death, only speculation, and as with many things in Dubai's elite circles, speculation wasn't enough. The investigation lost momentum. Officially, the case remained open. Unofficially, it was already being buried, just like Layla. The investigation had slowed, but it hadn't stopped. A few determined officers within the task force still chased threads, even as pressure from above pushed them to file the case as a private domestic matter. It was the kind of language used when the powerful wanted silence instead of justice. But something about the voice memo on Layla's tablet continued to bother one of the lead investigators, Major Fuad Issa. He had worked with Sheikh families before, and understood how power operated. Still, something about Layla's final words, "He told me he had to choose me or them," felt like a confession hidden inside a warning. Major Fuad turned his attention back to the data they had recovered from Layla's devices. Most of it had been sanitized, either by Layla herself or someone who got there before the police, but the Voice Memos app had a hidden cloud sync feature that hadn't been deactivated. A digital forensics expert, working late one night, managed to unlock a secondary backup folder that hadn't been fully deleted. Inside were several corrupted audio files and screenshots, blurred, distorted, mostly useless. But one image stood out, a photo of a note written in block letters on the back of a menu. The message read, "Don't trust the driver, he works for them. Meet at 9, not midnight, no contact after." It was signed only with the letter O. It changed everything. Until that point, Tariq, Layla's driver, had been considered a victim, or at the very least, an innocent accomplice. His disappearance was assumed to be either an escape or a silencing. But now, suspicion twisted in a new direction. What if Tariq hadn't vanished with Layla? What if he had handed her over? The theory made sense. Tariq had access to Layla's schedule, knew the escape plan, and drove her directly to the meeting point. And yet no sign of his body had been found. No personal effects, no digital footprint. What if he was still alive and hiding? The task force quietly reopened his file. They began digging into his financial history, checking offshore accounts, interviewing his family. Within a week, they found a deposit of 500,000 dirhams made into a Dubai-based account in Tariq's name, just 4 days before Layla's disappearance. The funds were traced back to a shell corporation tied to a private security firm that had once worked with Sheikh Hamdan's personal legal team. It was a bombshell. Major Fuad submitted the findings up the chain of command. The reaction was immediate and chilling. He was pulled off the case without explanation. His replacement closed the file within 48 hours, citing insufficient cause for further inquiry. The backup folder was sealed. The original voice memo from Layla was removed from the active evidence list. But by then too many people had seen it. Someone within the department leaked a copy of the memo and the image of the menu to a foreign journalist based in London. It was published anonymously in an investigative blog, under the headline, "Buried in the Sand, the Silencing of Layla Al-Maktoum." The article spread like wildfire through hidden corners of the internet, quickly translated into multiple languages. The Sheikh's media team worked furiously to contain it, calling it fake, slander, foreign propaganda. But the damage was done. Whispers grew loud. People began to talk, quietly, carefully. Staff members at the mansion resigned in clusters. A lawyer from the Sheikh's business empire disappeared for a week, then resurfaced in Geneva. Nadia, the maid, stopped showing up for work, and was never seen again. Her apartment was left untouched, clothes still hanging in the closet, a tea mug still warm on the counter, as if she had simply vanished into thin air. And yet the one person the world still asked about remained missing. Omar Rahim, the man at the center of it all, lover, officer, fugitive, had left no shadow, no hint of where he had gone. Some believed he was dead, buried deep beneath the same sand that took Layla. Others whispered he had escaped to Europe, protected by people who wanted the truth buried just as badly as the Sheikh wanted silence. Either way, the truth had slipped into the realm of rumor. And in Dubai, rumors were sometimes more dangerous than fact. The case of Layla Al-Maktoum's death didn't end with a trial. There was no courtroom drama, no headline-grabbing conviction. Instead, it ended the way so many stories of the powerful do, in silence. a silence as thick and suffocating as the desert that swallowed her. Officially, the final report released by the Dubai authorities labeled her death an unfortunate outcome of an unsanctioned escape attempt. No suspects were named, no charges filed. The report emphasized her emotional instability, and hinted at her being manipulated by an unidentified male party with a personal agenda. The media was instructed to avoid speculation. Any outlets that ignored the warning were quickly stripped of credentials or had their articles removed from servers. Privately, the few remaining investigators on the original task force knew better. They had watched the evidence disappear piece by piece, interviews redacted, files classified, phone logs erased. Even the copy of Layla's voice memo was nowhere to be found on government network. A shadow had been cast over the truth, and anyone who tried to step into the light was warned to step back. One by one, the people closest to the case either vanished or walked away. Major Whodunit, who had fought hardest to expose the internal cover-up, submitted his resignation 3 weeks after being removed from the investigation. He cited health concerns. He left Dubai days later with his wife and daughter, and was last seen boarding a flight to Lisbon. No one has heard from him since. The final sighting of Nadia, the maid, was at a hotel in Ras Al Khaimah. Security footage showed her checking out under a false name. The next day, her phone went dark. Her family claimed they hadn't heard from her. Her apartment remained untouched, drawers full, passport missing, gone. But it was the disappearance of Omar Rahim that kept the city's whispers alive. Despite months of quiet surveillance, cross-border intelligence sharing, and private investigators hired by those close to the Sheikh, Omar had not been found. Interpol issued a low-level red notice, but there was no real effort behind it. He had simply ceased to exist. Rumors spread like fire in the underground, the kind that couldn't be proven but refused to die. Some said he had made it to the Balkans and was living under a false name in Montenegro, working on fishing boats, and sending encrypted letters to someone still in Dubai. Others swore he had never left the desert at all, that he had been caught the same night as Layla, buried next to her in an unmarked grave. A few believed something darker, that Omar had never truly disappeared, but had been absorbed into the very system he once tried to fight, paid off or blackmailed into silence. The truth remained elusive. Sheikh Hamdan never addressed the matter publicly, not once. A month after the incident, he was seen attending a global energy conference in Qatar, smiling alongside world leaders, shaking hands with investors, presenting himself as a symbol of modern power and stability. His wife's name was never mentioned again in official channels. Her funeral was private, her resting place unknown. Behind the palace walls, a new staff was hired, guards replaced, cameras upgraded. A fresh coat of white paint covered the courtyard where Layla once walked. Her memory was being erased, one layer at a time, but something lingered. Every so often a photo would surface online, a grainy image of a man walking through a train station in Bulgaria, or a shadowy figure at a port in Marseille. Always the same caption, "Is this Omar Rahim?" Each time the post would vanish within hours, the account deactivated, the uploader silenced. Layla's story had ended, but her voice, captured in that final haunting memo, refused to be buried. It echoed quietly in the digital corners of the world, passed from journalist to activist, survivor to listener. If something happens to me, don't believe what they say. In the end, her death became more than a scandal. It became a warning etched in whispers, carved into silence. And in the heart of Dubai, where power was untouchable and truth was currency, her murder remained a ghost that refused to rest.